Morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Brianna Coma, and I am the Conservation Program Coordinator with Sierra Club Iowa chapter. We are here because Next Era Energy has proposed a project that will have long-lasting consequences for Iowa's energy future, restarting the Duane Arnold nuclear plant, which has been in decommission since 2020 and was first opened in 1975. To do this, Next Era asked federal regulators to let them abandon three planned solar projects and shift those connections over to nuclear instead. This is about more than just one facility, though. It's about whether Iowa will continue to lead with clean, renewable energy or whether we take a step backwards into costly, risky technology. Nuclear energy comes with major challenges such as water usage, safety concerns, radioactive waste, and financial costs that fall on local communities. Meanwhile, Iowa has proven that wind and solar can power our state safely, affordably, and sustainably. The nuclear industry says that the rise of energy-hungry data centers means renewables aren't enough, but we know that is not true. Iowa has the tools, the technology, and the know-how to meet those demands with renewable energy while protecting our health, our land, and our future. Today, we will hear from four speakers and we will save questions from reporters until the end. Thank you again for being here. And our first panelist is Mark Z. Jacobson, who is a Stanford professor of Civic and Environmental Engineering and Director of Atmosphere and Energy Program, a leading researcher on air pollution, climate change, and renewable energy. He has authored 7 books and nearly 200 articles, ranked the world's #1 scientist in meteorology and atmospheric sciences, and named a top global clean energy leader. His work underpins the U.S. Green New Deal and international renewable energy policies. He co-founded the Solutions Project nonprofit, has testified in landmark climate cases, and continues to shape solutions for a 100% renewable future. I'll now turn it over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Brianna. I'm just going to share my screen. Here we go. So I'm going to talk just briefly about, first of all, how renewables in Iowa are doing so well and are keeping costs of electricity low. And in addition to that, also why nuclear is a problem going forward, especially new nuclear. So let me start out with, this is probably a surprise to everybody, but there are actually 11 states in the US that supplied in the last 4 quarters. Well, that's Q3 2024 to Q2 through Q2 2025. Between 50 and 120% of their electricity demand with just wind, water, and solar. And Iowa was number 3. South Dakota supplied 120% of its electricity from wind, water, solar, primarily wind, 87% wind, 31% hydro, and the rest solar. Montana was 95%, and Iowa was almost 79% wind, water, solar, with 74.2% wind, 2.5% solar, and 1.7% hydro. And despite this huge amount, this is a percent of demand met by wind, water, solar in the annual average. And when you see South Dakota over 120%, they also produced like another 10% coal and 10% gas, electricity, so close to 137% total, and they exported the difference. The point is they could supply over 100% of their demand with just wind, water, solar. Iowa, 79%, mostly wind. But the price of electricity in these 11 states, and 10 of the 11 states, was below the national average by at least 2 cents a kilowatt hour. Iowa was below 3 cents a kilowatt hour below the US national average, despite all this wind. So it's just a myth for people to claim that renewables are driving up electricity prices. They're keeping electricity prices low. It's only when you don't have renewables that your electricity prices are going higher. And there are some states that, like California, that have high electricity prices. Not that they're the 12th most renewables as a fraction of electricity demand, but their high electricity prices have nothing to do with renewables. They have to do with wildfires, that costs from transmission line sparks that have been passed on to customers, gas disasters, the costs have been passed on to customers. The cost of keeping the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant open in California has been passed on to customers. These are the main reasons why California has such high electricity prices. In fact, IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, did a survey across the world and found a weighted average cost of fossil fuels about $100 a megawatt hour, but utility PV, $44 a megawatt hour, onshore wind, 33, offshore wind, 75. All of these renewables are lower cost in the world average already compared with fossil fuels. Well, okay, so what's wrong with new nuclear electricity? There's a lot of myths floating around about nuclear. One, that it's no zero carbon or even close to zero carbon. It's not. Two, that you can put it up in any reasonable time and that it has low cost. Okay, there are seven major problems with new nuclear, long planning to operation times, high costs. They actually have carbon dioxide and water vapor and heat emissions that make it equivalent to 9 to 37 times the carbon equivalent emissions as wind. There's a risk of nuclear weapons proliferation when you, especially small modular nuclear reactors, you want to ship them around the world. It's just countries without weapons will suddenly want to develop them. Core meltdown risks, waste storage issues and risks, but you have to store waste for 200,000 years, and underground uranium mining lung cancer risk from radon. So just more specifically, worldwide, it takes 12 to 23 years between planning and operation of a new nuclear plant versus half a year to 3 years for new solar and wind. And in North America and Europe, that's actually 17 to 23 years. Like, and I'll show you in a second, so I won't go into detail here, but and also the capital costs are 10 to 20 times the capital costs of new solar or wind. And the levelized cost of electricity is about 3 to 8 times of new solar and wind. And the CO2 equivalent emissions is 9 to 37 times that of wind. In addition, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says there's robust evidence and high agreement that increased use of nuclear will lead to more weapons proliferation risk, nuclear weapons that is, meltdown risk, waste risk for over 200,000 years, and underground uranium mining lung cancer risk from radon. So just to give you a couple examples, these are plants that how long the planning to operation time, the relevant time. There's also the construction time shown as well, but the planning to operation time is what's relevant. In Finland, 23 years, Hinkley Point in UK, 21 to 23 years. The only reactors built in the US in the last 30 years from scratch in Georgia, 17 and 18 years respectively from planning to operation. In France, 20 years. So North America, Europe, there are 17 to 23 years. Even in China, where they're building more than other places, it's still 13 to 14 years, 12 to 13, 17 years. In the UAE, there's 4 reactors put in there, 12 to 15 years. So we're talking, it just takes too long. It costs too much. Why would you waste money and time on something that's not going to help you at all in the short term, let alone the long term, because of the carbon equivalent emissions that I mentioned? This, I'm not going to go into this, but this shows the details of how you calculate the carbon equivalent emissions of nuclear. There are emissions associated with just building the plant, operating it. You need to energy to mine and refine uranium continuously and to decommission the plant. And then just waiting around for the nuclear plant to be built, you have these emissions from the background grid. Those you have to account for relative to wind or solar, which you can put up much faster. And then there's heat emissions, there's water vapor emissions. There's other emissions that total of 9 to 37 times the emissions compared with wind. So with that, I'll stop and answer questions a bit later, but thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. And now we will hand it over to Joseph Vignano. He is the Executive Director of Radiation and Public Health Project, where he has worked for over 20 years. He is nationally recognized expert on the health risks of exposure to radioactivity from nuclear reactors and weapons. He has published 43 medical journal articles, 4 books, and dozens of editorials and letters. Joseph directed the only U.S. study measuring in-body radiation near nuclear plants through strontium-90 testing and has provided testimonies to over 20 government agencies. His work has been featured on major outlets including New York Times, USA Today, CNN, and Fox News, as highlighted in and has been highlighted in several documentaries. He holds a master's in public health from the University of North Carolina, along with an MBA from Fordham University in New York. And now take it away, Joseph.
Thanks, Brianna. Mark gave a very good presentation on the concerns about nuclear power, and some of them were health and safety concerns, the biggest one being the chance of a uh, catastrophic meltdown. But in addition to this, in a discussion about what to do with Duane Arnold in the future, one thing has been missing, and that is what is the effect on the health of people living near Duane Arnold of routinely released radioactivity. When a nuclear reactor operates, it creates over 100 new isotopes, new chemicals that are not found in nature, but only found when an atomic bomb explodes or when a reactor operates. These are gases and particles. As I said, there are over 100 of them. Each of them are radioactive. And even though many of them are kept as and retained as nuclear waste, some of these chemicals are in fact routinely released into the air and into the water, and thus getting into the human bodies through the food chain. The question here is what, if any, changes have happened in the Duane Arnold area. Number one, in the years that the plant was operating, and number two, in the years since the plant shut down in 2020. Okay, I'm going to present several graphs. Hope everyone can see this one. In the late 1980s, the National Cancer Institute did the only study ever, national study ever of cancer near nuclear plants. And it included the area near Duane Arnold. I made a request to the Iowa Cancer Registry for updated information. And this is what we're looking at are the cancer incidence rates for Lynn County, Iowa, where Duane Arnold is located, and Benton, which is an adjoining county, versus the state of Iowa. And I'm looking only at children age and adolescents age 0 to 19 and young adults in their 20s and 30s. I'll make this a little easier. You see in front of you three sets of three bars. Let's look at the one on the right-hand side, these three here, which puts age, all ages together from 0 to 39. Okay, the blue bar here shows that in the 6 years before Duane Arnold began operating, the two-county cancer rate was 6.5% below Iowa's. All right, these next two bars show what that local versus state ratio was for the first 23 years, and then the second 23 years the plant operated. In the first 23 years, not only did it was the local rate not below the state, it was exceeded it by 3.5%. And then in the most recent 23 years before shutdown, it jumped up to 12.5% above. Let's put this another way. Let's assume that this blue bar we see here, where the local rate is 6.5% below, had continued for the period that Duane Arnold operated. 482 residents of these two counties, or should I say 482 fewer residents of these two counties would have been diagnosed with cancer before the age of 40. Okay. There's much more that one can do with looking at what the health changes were after Duane Arnold opened, but the reason we pick these is that the younger people are much more sensitive to a dose of radiation compared to older adults. It's much more harmful to the fetus, the child, and the young adult. Okay, that's question one. What happened during the time Duane Arnold operated? Let's move to the next question. As I mentioned, Duane Arnold shut in 2020, and as did a number of U.S. nuclear plants. Years ago, in the early 2000s, our group did several studies, several journal articles, where we looked at the change in the infant mortality rate. These are deaths, the death rate for before the first birthday, before and after shutdown of 8 nuclear plants. And we found that near 8 out of 8 plants in the 2 years immediately after shutdown, the local infant death rates declined much more rapidly than the United States rate. Here, I'm taking 7 nuclear plants that shut down since 2011, and I'm comparing the infant death rate before and after shutdown. Okay. You may not be able to read some of these, the names of the plants, but the second blue bar to the left is Duane Arnold. And I compare the years 2016 to 2020, when it was still operating, with 2021 to 24. And you can see this blue bar here shows that from one period to the next, the 2 counties, and I'm using Lynn County with Johnson County as well, which is an adjoining county directly downwind, the infant death rate declined 18%. And this little stump, this little red bar right next to it is the change in the US rate. In those same years, the US rate only declined 2%, as opposed to 18% in the Duane Arnold area. And you can see that these blue bars all are much, are all decline much greater than the national averages near the other plants. Finally, I'm going to go to one more graph looking strictly at Duane Arnold. Okay, we have 3 sets of health indicators of infants. All right, the first one we've seen already. These 3 here, once again, are infant mortality. The blue bars, again, shows that there was an 18% decline in Lynn and Johnson County. The green bar here is the US, decline of 2%. And the one in the middle, the red bar, is all other Iowa counties, which declined about 9%. Decline, but not nearly as dramatic as those 2 counties closest to Duane Arnold. Okay, the middle 3, we are looking at premature births. And these are defined as births before 34 weeks of gestation. A normal pregnancy is 9 months, or about 40 weeks to have a full-term birth. These are we're looking at what percentage of the births occurred less than 34 weeks. And after the shutdown of Duane Arnold, there was just over a 20% decline in Johnson and Lynn County, compared to an increase of 4.5% for the rest of Iowa, and an increase of 1% for the United States. The third set of graphs is kind of related. These are low weight births, babies born, the percent of babies born under 2.2 pounds. there was a decline of almost 15% in Johnson and Lynn counties, and the U.S. rate, the other Iowa rate was up very slightly, and the U.S. rate low slightly. These are significant numbers. The biggest one being the premature births. We have moved now from an average of about 150 or 160 premature births per year to something much less. The excess number of premature births is slightly over 100. And you can tell that these three measures of infant health they're related to each other. In other words, if a baby is born prematurely or born at very low weight, it's much more likely that the child will die by 1 year old. So I'm going to stop sharing here. The key point here is that these are just early statistics, early descriptions of what happened to local health of the young during the time that Duane Arnold operated and during the time after shutdown. There should be no final decision on the future of Duane Arnold unless these statistics and additional ones should be thoroughly analyzed and thoroughly understood by officials and shared with the public. People need to know if there is a health risk, an actual health risk to restarting the plant, and that should be a major part of the discussion. Thank you for the time, and I'll be glad to answer any questions later.
Thank you so much, Joseph. We will now hand it over to Wally Taylor, Conservation Chair and Legal Chair of Iowa Chapter of Sierra Club, who has practiced environmental law for over 40 years and brings deep expertise on legal strategies to protect Iowa's energy future.
Thank you. As Mark Jacobson explained, nuclear power is not the answer to our 21st century energy needs. Nuclear power is not clean or renewable, as the nuclear industry claims. Nuclear reactor fuel is made from uranium, which is mined from the ground, just like oil, gas, or coal. No one refers to those energy sources as renewable, nor is nuclear clean. The uranium that is mined leaves tailings, and uranium processing leaves behind radioactive waste and harmful chemicals. During the operation of the nuclear plant, a radioactive material called tritium often leaks and pollutes groundwater. But the really dirty aspect of nuclear power is the radioactive waste, which is radioactive for hundreds of thousands of years, and no one knows what to do with it. You may recall that a permanent repository was planned for a site in Nevada called Yucca Mountain. There was so much opposition that the plan was abandoned. Two so-called interim storage sites in Texas and New Mexico were also proposed, but both states have objected and prevented those sites from being developed. Over the past several years, nuclear plants have been closing because they are not economical in the face of renewables. The Duane Arnold plant in Iowa is one of those that closed. Now, Next Era, which owns Duane Arnold, wants to restart the plant. This is a risky proposition. And Duane Arnold is not the only closed plant proposing to restart. There is also Palisades in Michigan and 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania. And there's even some talk about maybe restarting the Indian Point plant just outside of New York City. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or NRC, has no regulations allowing a nuclear plant in decommissioning status to restart. The NRC's decommissioning regulation is clear that the purpose is to close the plant and terminate the license. So the nuclear industry has been cobbling together a scheme to use existing NRC regulations they claim will allow closed reactors to be restarted. Duane Arnold has been in decommissioning status for 5 years and not operating during that time. So it is not just a matter of putting fuel back in the reactor and starting it up. NextEra has applied for an exemption from the NRC's decommissioning rule. That is the first and most important step in the use or misuse of NRC regulations. But an exemption is just for an unanticipated circumstance in a specific situation that would cause undue hardship, and it would be unfair to apply the decommissioning rule. The NRC in the past and federal courts have said that that an exemption should be very rarely used in very rare circumstances. That's clearly not the case with Duane Arnold. Restarting Duane Arnold is a planned undertaking, not causing any undue hardship to NextEra. This is a misuse and perversion of the NRC rules. NextEra is copying the playbook initiated at the Palisades nuclear plant in Michigan. So the exemption is not being used as an exemption, but as a new policy not contemplated by NRC rules. What it amounts to is the NRC is doing a rulemaking without going through the rulemaking procedure of developing the rule and inviting public participation in creating the rule. It's also unlikely that Duane Arnold has been put in what's called layup, which means that the structures and components of the plant have not been maintained to allow restart. Instead, the plant has been in decommissioning mode, so there's been no intent or expectation of restarting until very recently. And not putting the plant in layup means that structures and components in the Duane Arnold plant have been allowed to corrode and fall into disrepair, which is a recipe for disaster. Again, if the Palisades is the example, NextEra will attempt to get by without properly bringing Duane Arnold up to restart condition when it has not been properly maintained for restart. For example, at Palisades, it's a pressurized water reactor, so it has what are called steam generators. And those steam generators have been allowed to corrode, and they could very easily fail. And so what Palisades has proposed is to put what are called sleeves inside those steam generator tubes, but that will not be sufficient to really address the corrosion and the degradation of those steam generators. Now, Duane Arnold is what's called a boiling water reactor. It doesn't have steam generators, but it does have other structures that are certainly subject to corrosion and degradation without proper layup. We can't rely on the NRC, unfortunately, because the NRC envisions itself as a part of the nuclear industry, not as an independent regulator. I know that's hard for the public to believe, but I've been through that many times, and the NRC devises its regulations and policies to allow the industry to do whatever it wants, and it creates hurdles and fortresses, as one decision said, to prevent the public to participate and raise objections to anything that the nuclear industry wants to do. And the Palisades and 3 Mile Island, at least, are relying on millions of dollars of taxpayer subsidies to restart. Palisades is getting money from the Federal Department of Energy and also the Michigan authorities. 3 Mile Island has done the same. We can't confirm yet if the Duane Arnold restart is also going to rely on the taxpayers. I've made an open records request and have not gotten any firm response, and it's hard to get a Freedom of Information request responded to by the Department of Energy. They take forever, and it just keeps going, and so we can't confirm yet if Duane Arnold will get taxpayer money, but again, if Palisades and 3 Mile Island are the template, then that's what we can expect. But if Duane Arnold is being restarted to provide power for data centers, as has been suggested, taxpayers should not have to pay to provide power to a private industry. It will not be a public utility. Also troubling is that NextEra has received approval from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to transfer its interconnection permit from 3 proposed solar projects that it was going to develop in order to transfer that interconnection permit to allow Duane Arnold to restart. So instead of developing the truly renewable energy that Mark Jacobson has shown conclusively is the best way to go, NextEra is going back to the discredited reliance on nuclear power and all the problems that entails. We should not let that happen. So I'll turn it back to Brianna.
Thank you so much, Wally. Next up, we have Dawn Safer, co-chair of Sierra Club Grassroots Network Nuclear Free Team, and on the board of Tennessee Environmental Council. He has been working to raise awareness of the dangers and downsides of nuclear power for almost 50 years. I'll hand it over to you, Don.
Thank you, Brianna. So yeah, I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, and Tennessee is a center for the nuclear industry. So I've had many years to learn about nuclear power, what's wrong with nuclear power, and engage with the local utility, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and then the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, Division of Radiological Health, which has really been an education. And I wanted to bounce off of what Wally was saying and provide some background about the Duane Arnold reactor. Restarting it, I can't say how much of a mistake it would be, how ambitious it is, and how unlikely that they really will be able to get it going again. If they do, it could have devastating consequences. And it's important to note that this restart process allows NextEra to delay the $1 billion decommissioning process. It's been taking about $1 billion to take these reactors apart once they're done and try to figure out where to put the radiation that has been created. So they will not have to do that as long as they can claim that it's going to be restarted. So the Duane Arnold reactor is actually identical to the Fukushima reactors that melted down and exploded in March of 2011. The GE Mark I is the design. It's an old, dangerous, well-documented, flawed design. As far back as 1972, and these reactors were actually designed in the 1960s. So just think about that for a second. These are really old designs at the very beginning, almost the infancy of the nuclear industry. And in 1972, an Atomic Energy Commission, the predecessor of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, safety official recommended the Mark I containment system be abandoned. In 1975, three of the GE reactors engineers, high-level engineers, resigned and issued a public statement saying it was so flawed it could lead to a devastating accident. Because the containment design does not take into account the dynamic loads that could be experienced with a loss of coolant. And then Fukushima happened, almost as predicted in a way. And some of the nuclear industry experts that are not pro-nuclear said, well, yeah, the GE Mark I was the reactor they would have expected to have the biggest problem. So that's a very good reason to just go ahead with the decommissioning. Another is the used fuel pool. The industry calls the used fuel spent fuel. Spent is a misleading term because those fuel rods are actually millions of times more radioactive than the fuel when it went into the reactor, and they are deadly. And those the spent fuel pool is over 40 feet above ground level. And it turned out to be quite a problem at Fukushima when those fuel pools were losing their water. The fuel rods have to be covered in water all the time, and that water has to be cooled all the time. And all of that creates a huge problem. Currently, so the Arnold reactor started fissioning in 1974. It was designed to run for 40 years. It has received a 20-year life extension. That life extension process has been deeply criticized as being really inappropriate or just not as attuned to safety as it should be. And a lot of the components in these reactors were designed to last 40 years. There's no way to determine the integrity of critical inner reactor components that are subject to the intense conditions inside a nuclear reactor. Extreme heat, neutron bombardment, high pressure, and rapid temperature changes. The possibilities of component failure and a serious accident increase as these reactors age, and the compounding problem of disuse for an over 5-year period now, but it'll be many more years, if ever, that before they could get that reactor going again. That's just a huge threat. Also, something that's not being talked about or thought about is the highly irradiated used fuel, that spent fuel that is on site. All the fuel ever created at Duane Arnold is there at Duane Arnold, and it's sitting in dry storage, which is stainless steel canisters that are just a ½ inch thick. And those canisters were designed for short-term storage. And there's a lot of questions, serious questions, when you get into scientific and investigation of what's going on with that fuel, used fuel in those containment canisters, as to just how safe that system is for longer terms. Those canisters are filled with an inert gas. If oxygen gets to the fuel rods, you get spontaneous, either an explosion or spontaneous slow burning, or at the very least, a leak of massive amounts of radiation. And people don't generally recognize that the amounts of radiation in those canisters can cause radiation problems for the surrounding areas equal to that of a containment loss of an operating reactor. The danger with this reactor does not end when the reactor is closed, but this fuel sitting there is can be a huge problem, and there are significant unknowns that scientists have not been able to identify. I mean, that fuel is taken to what's now called high burnup levels in the reactors, and that's been going on since around the year 2000. And those high burnup levels, the longer you leave the fuel in the reactor to burn, and the more uranium-235 you have in the new fuel, allows longer burn times, but it creates higher and higher levels of radiation and heat in the fuel. Plus, it starts stressing the structure of the fuel rods to the point that you don't know how well it's going to do in the aging process. And compound that with what Wally was saying about Yucca Mountain and the fact that we have no credible plan for the waste, and it's not because of politics, it's not because of you know, you know, concerns by the population. It's because the science is so difficult about this material, and we just need to stop making more of it. So the I think that's kind of enough about Duane Arnold. Additionally, there are proposals around the country for new nuclear. We're seeing a lot of them in Tennessee, in conjunction with a industry rebranding that's going on to label nuclear energy clean and green and a climate solution. And those are really high cost public relations efforts. The industry spends a lot of money. The DOE has a budget of $50 billion a year. And unfortunately, the press and the public are not really looking under the hood of all those claims and proposals, which range to the fantastic of being able to use the spent fuel, the highly radiated used fuel, again in reactors. In order to do that, you have to reprocess the fuel and separate the plutonium out. The plutonium is a perfect bomb-making material, nuclear bomb-making material. And so when you hear about recycling, so-called recycling, which is, I think, more accurately called reprocessing, you must go into the history of that and look at the environmental problems at Hanford in Washington, at West Valley in New York, in France where they do it. That process creates much more radioactive waste than you start with, and a much more difficult problem to contain. So I think a high level of skepticism is in order with any of these proposals. And on the subject of small modular reactors, I think the main thing to remember is that the economies of scale that you get in larger reactors disappear with the small reactors. So the cost per kilowatt hour is going to be greater, and they actually create more radioactive waste per kilowatt of electricity than larger reactors. And there's documentation of that out there. So with that, I think I'll wrap up, but thank you for having me, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Don, and thank you so much, all of our speakers. We really appreciate your insights. And with that, we will open it up to questions. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand or put them in the chat. We do have one question going back to Joe. I think it was your first chart that you showed. Joseph, sorry. This graph is showing the diversion of cancer incidence rates from the state rate. Example, does 0 represent the statewide rate at any given time? And
Yes.
again, this was for Joseph.
Let's go back to that first graph. Again, the blue bar that you see here it represents the local rate around Duane Arnold of cancer in people diagnosed under 40 compared to the state of Iowa. To the period before the Duane Arnold plant began operating. And afterwards, we show higher, higher levels, increasingly higher. I want to add one more thing to this to make this a little stronger. I know it may not look like much, this is 3% and this is 12% above the state rate. In the past 50 years in Iowa and all across the United States, the incidence of newly diagnosed cases of cancer in children, adolescents, and young adults is up about 50%. Okay, and while there are probably multiple reasons for it, one reason that's given is better diagnosis. No child gets screened for cancer in this country. No adolescent gets screened. No person in their 20s or 30s gets screened. The only way you diagnose cancer is if that child or adolescent or young adult develops a symptom. So just the just trying to match the state of Iowa alone is no great honor. Okay, the fact that the local rate is going up even higher is really bad. I mean, the around in the two counties near Duane Arnold, the incidence rate of cancer under 40 is up like 65% in the last 50 years. That should be considered a crisis. Okay, and we're talking about a lot of people in the last 45 years that Duane Arnold was running. Over 3,000 residents of these two counties under 40 were diagnosed with cancer. That shouldn't be happening. Did I answer the question enough, or?
Yep, that's great. I just wanted to make sure it was relative to the state average. That's all. Thanks.
Yes, that's right. And again, the source is the Iowa Cancer Registry.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And we did have a quick question from Richard, and the charts and graphs will be attached to the press release. So you can keep an eye on that. And I see Cami has her hand raised. I'll let you take yourself off mute and ask your question.
Hi, everyone. I have a bit of a two-part question. I wondered if anyone here was able to address the capacity differences between restarting Duane Arnold and then the solar projects you mentioned that NextEra is abandoning in favor of restarting Duane Arnold. And then the second part of that is if anyone has an idea what they think the main reason that nuclear plants are trying to restart right now. Is it because of this really intense projected load increase in the next several years, or is it a changing political scene? Just kind of wondered what folks thought about that.
Well, I can say it can't be because of a load increase because nuclear reactor has a fixed peak power output. So for example, I mean, California, like the Diablo Canyon nuclear is 2.2 gigawatts, and it's constant except for the 10% of the hours of the year that is down completely. But the peak demand, the average demand is 24 gigawatts, but the peak demand is 50 gigawatts. So it helps nothing at all when you go suddenly from 24 gigawatts to 50 gigawatts and your peak output stays at 2 gigawatts. It's not helping with peak output at all. It's helping with background output. So there's no argument whatsoever that nuclear power helps with peak output. It just doesn't, because it provides a background output. In terms of what the solar, I mean, whereas solar will actually provide much higher peak output at much lower cost. I mean, California has 22 on the main grid has 22 gigawatts of solar and 2 gigawatts of nuclear. And Duane Arnold is less than 2 gigawatts of nuclear. I don't know what somebody else knows here exactly what it is, but it's definitely less than 2.2 gigawatts. But we have 22 gigawatts of solar on the grid, and we have most of the demand during the day, usually in the late afternoon, where there's still 17, 18 gigawatts of solar operating. And that's providing peak power. So it makes no sense why. And then there are batteries that actually, when we've had 187 days this year with more supply of renewables than demand for electricity. And we have now 11.5 gigawatts of batteries on the main grid. So when we have extra electricity, we then put it into batteries and use that at night when the sun goes down, when you also have peak power demand. That's what's supplying peak power now. Our gas is down 40% in the last 2 years because we have batteries and solar replacing it. And the nuclear is completely wasteful. All the reason it's being pushed is because there are now subsidies available to keep it open. That's the only reason they're going for these, is because it's just free money they're getting from the federal government to get rid of solar, to push solar out and push wind out as much as possible. So there's no scientific and or logical or business case for it. It's just a complete money grab for subsidies. That's the only reason.
And this is Wally. A couple of other points. First of all, as far as the big data centers, Mark's colleague at Stanford, Amory Lovins, I wrote an article recently indicating that the alleged huge demand from data centers may be overstated. And so we may need more evidence on whether that's a valid assumption or not. And secondly, just to say that the NextEra is abandoning 3 solar projects for Duane Arnold, and that perhaps those solar projects are not equal to the 600 megawatts that the Duane Arnold produces. You still have to consider that there are other solar projects and wind projects that can be developed. So you don't necessarily need Duane Arnold if you develop more wind and solar.
Thank you so much. And we have another question from Emily with KCRG. They said many people around Lynn County are for the plant restarting, especially for the jobs it will bring back. Any comment on how many people think it will be a positive thing?
Well, I live less than 10 miles from Duane Arnold, so I hear all of the arguments about why Duane Arnold should be restarted. Certainly there were jobs there, but there are other jobs, and certainly we can, by we, I mean society, can provide a just transition for people who work there. Duane Arnold's been closed for 5 years now, so that transition may have happened already. And certainly we can find good jobs for folks. I mean, there aren't many companies developing film for cameras anymore. There aren't many companies developing typewriters anymore. So the economy keeps changing, and we as a society need to help everybody adopt to that change. I don't know if Mark has done any more work on that or not.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I go back to the solar and need for, I mean, the growth of solar, as I said in the beginning, Iowa is powered by almost 80% renewables in terms of a fraction of their demand. And those are just growing, and it has low cost of electricity. So why would you mess with that? Why not just keep growing solar, wind, batteries, and you'll get 100% renewables. There's no fuel cost whatsoever with renewables, which is the benefit, is why they're so low in cost, because like nuclear has a fuel cost. You have to keep paying for fuel, mining it, transporting it, refining it. It's very energy intensive. And whereas renewables have no fuel cost, with the batteries at such a low cost right now, this is why you can keep the grid stable with that, regardless of the variability of wind and solar now, because of the ability to store electricity. And I was also part of a larger grid too. So even if there was low wind in Iowa one day, you have high wind somewhere else, and therefore you don't have a blackout. So it just makes no sense to go backwards into an albatross technology like nuclear that has a lot of problems aside from the cost and the delays, but waste problems, as mentioned, meltdown risk, risk of radioactive release, and danger near the plants. And these small modular reactors don't exist. They're vaporware, so the potential reliance on them is just like that's just a fiction. They don't exist. There's no NRC approval for them. They don't even expect to be commercial for 10 years. And even then it's going to have the same problems as large reactors. And this Duane Arnold it's only 600 megawatts. That's hardly anything. I mean, that's you can replace that really easily at much lower cost, taking that money, the subsidy money that would keep it open, and just buy solar and wind and batteries, and you'll have replaced it and also provided much longer, safer electricity for a long time to come. So there's no justification whatsoever for keeping old nuclear plants open. All it does is waste money, keep prices higher, and you have such low cost, clean, renewable energy available, and they're so abundant that it just makes no sense otherwise.
Do you want to add to that, Don?
Yeah, I just want to highlight that connection between nuclear power and nuclear weapons and say that the whole thing started with the Manhattan Project, which of course we had a big part of in Tennessee with Oak Ridge, the secret city. But you have to recognize the power of money and the budget, that $50 billion budget that the Department of Energy has, which mostly goes to nuclear weapons and nuclear development, um, that causes this public relations push that keeps nuclear, it has improved its favorability ratings in the public's mind. It's been a very successful public relations campaign, but um, if, if nuclear power does not exist, nuclear weapons have a lot harder time, even in the United States and the other nuclear weapons countries, of keeping itself going because uh, that's not a big enough industry to train the people. So even though the nuclear power industry is not economic and it has huge environmental problems from the uranium mining and the communities that suffer through that, through all of the nuclear fuel chain, and we have that in Kentucky, where Paducah, Kentucky had a uranium enrichment facility. It's a Superfund site. Oak Ridge is parts of Oak Ridge are Superfund sites. It's a trail of woe and environmental problems. And I think what Joe has pointed out, that these reactors, the operating reactors, they've just not been studied for the health effects. And the local populations that are near there are being misled by that silence and using data from the 1980s to justify that, okay, people aren't being hurt by nuclear when um, the epidemiology is there to do better studies, but they're just not being done. And so it's a very massive attempt by the federal government to keep a big part of it going, and it's just not necessary. I'll stop, but I hope that helped.
Yes, thank you so much for that insight. And our next question is directed at Mark, and I think you've touched a little bit on this, but you might have more to add. You talked about concerns with building new plants. Is the restart of existing plants any more advisable?
Sorry, can you repeat it? Is it more advisable?
Yes, is the restart of existing plants any more advisable?
No, not at all, because if the reason they're closed for a reason. They're closed because they have high costs and or safety issues associated with them, or they're way past their normal lifetime. So the only reason plants are staying open is if they're being subsidized heavily, often by the federal government, but usually by the state government. Like in New York, three reactors were kept open for 12 more years at a cost of $8 billion of subsidy. That's just the subsidy. You could have taken that. And then after that 12 years, they have to get rid of them anyway, and then build new solar and wind and everything at another cost of let's say $8 billion. So why would you spend 8 billion just to keep it open when you could have just spent that 8 billion? Well, you spend 8 billion to keep it open, and then you spend another 8 billion to build new wind and solar after. So that's 16 billion. Why not just spend the first 8 billion to replace it? And then you don't have to waste $8 billion and you have the same energy. So this is what's going on here, is to keep any of these reactors open, be it Diablo Canyon, the reactors in New York, Palisades, or Duane Arnold, it's a lot of money, and to keep them open, it's just subsidy. And who's going to end up paying it? Taxpayers. A lot of it state taxpayers, but also federal taxpayers are going to be paying this subsidy to keep it open. You're going to have to replace it in any case, and it's going to be down more and more and more because it's old. And even if it does go open, so there's no point in which just to provide 600 megawatts of power when you could build now, like, two wind farms or a wind and a solar farm with a total of 600 megawatts, and you're done, and you're replaced. You can get the same total annual power output, and with the batteries, you can use that to just match the demand. Now, nuclear doesn't match demand; it just gives you a flat supply. And it definitely doesn't help when you have big peaks in power output because it gives you a very low flat supply of power, and you can't change that. So it's actually when you have a lot of wind, that's also it's not good either, because when you have a lot of wind, more wind than total power you need, the nuclear stays on, so you're basically wasting power too. So, and you can't shut it off very easily. So anyway, there's no benefit whatsoever of keeping this open. It's just it's only a money grab. That's all it is.
Thank you so much for that. And I do realize that we are a minute over, so if anybody has to hop off, please feel free. We do have a couple more questions here, and then I'll give us a hard stop. But this question from Richard is directed at Joe. Are there any other factors like advancements in research or treatment that could help explain the decreases in health concerns post-shutdown?
Yes, I should have mentioned that in my presentation, that when you look at something like the trend in infant mortality or low weight births or premature births, there are many factors that could affect them, um, like access to good medical care and health habits of the mother during pregnancy and so on. Those should all be considered. However, when you see a graph like I presented today and showed that near all 7 shut nuclear plants, we had large declines in infant deaths. And 25 years ago, we looked at 8 other ones. It was 8 for 8. After a while, 15 plants in a row showed more healthy babies after shutdown. It looks more and more likely that the shutdown of the nuclear plant and the end of the routine emissions and exposure to radioactivity is playing a role, perhaps a major role.
Thank you so much. And we have a question from Anika. NextEra has said that Duane Arnold would be restarting to meet demands from the tech sector. Is it likely to be online any earlier than renewables could be added to the grid? And they also said that Q4 of 2028 is when Duane is supposed to be online.
This is Wally. I'll start. Hopefully Mark can follow up. First of all, starting Duane Arnold by 2028 may be optimistic. The Palisades case is in litigation right now. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the commissioners themselves, have not approved it yet. It's on appeal to the commission. The NRC staff has approved it, but it isn't finally approved by the full commission yet. And as Mark indicated, you can develop wind and solar pretty quickly, and we've shown here in Iowa how you can do that.
Thank you so much. And we have one last question here from Richard. What's the current status of Palisades plant restart? And you kind of mentioned this, Wally. They've heard different accounts, some saying it's essentially a done deal.
Well, with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, everything's a done deal, it seems like. But as I say, we have the issues on appeal. We're challenging the exemption that I talked about in my presentation. We're challenging the license amendment that was granted by the staff of the NRC regarding the steam generator problem. And we're challenging the environmental impact, or I'm sorry, environmental assessment. They did not do an environmental impact statement. So those are all issues that are on appeal and will be, or have been appealed to the commission and will be challenged in court later on if the commission does not agree with us. So that's ongoing. A 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania, that's being, I'm not involved in that case other than indirectly, but that's being challenged as well. So it isn't totally a done deal yet. We have steps to go through.
Thank you so much again. And if you have any other questions, feel free to email me and I'll make sure that I get it to our panelists and we'll get an answer to you. But thank you so much again for everyone coming and to our incredible panelists. I really appreciate your insights on all of this. A recording will be sent out with the press release along with the slides and charts that were shown. And again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. But thank you again for coming and have a great rest of the day, everybody. Bye-bye.